Okay, so in Module 6 and then also in Module 7, we're going to be focusing on causes of anxiety disorders. So, as kind of an overview, what we're going to see here first is the biological vulnerability. There is some sort of heritability that can contribute to negative affect, which can contribute to mood disorders in addition to anxiety disorders. There are specific psychological vulnerabilities, like physical sensations are potentially dangerous. You associate a sensation with danger, and that can make you more likely to have anxiety. And then there's more generalized psychological vulnerability, like events being under or not controllable, unpredictable. Okay. So there's a variety of theories as to how anxiety disorders develop. One of them is an evolutionary theory. So, this is where there are adaptive and maladaptive fears. So, as I said at the beginning of this chapter, anxiety can be part of an adaptive system. It is an evolutionary significance for anxiety and fear, that these emotional response systems really are adaptive in a lot of situations. They mobilize responses that help somebody survive in both immediate dangers and then also long range threats. But each type of anxiety disorder can be viewed as a dysregulation of this mechanism that has evolved to deal with particular kinds of danger, but now is wrongly applied in some manner. So, from an evolutionary sense, it was good to have some anxiety to try to anticipate bad things happening so you can avoid them and therefore survive. But somewhere along the way, that process went a little haywire, and we see the development of anxiety disorders. Now, in social factors, we have a variety of things that can contribute. So, the first is stressful life events, which we talked about at the early part of this semester. And it can really influence the onset of anxiety disorders as well as depression. People who develop anxiety disorders are much more likely to have experienced an event involving some sort of danger or insecurity or family discord. So think about the items that you maybe filled out back when we did that life stress inventory and some of the various stressful life events you've experienced. And you can see where that could maybe be an outgrowth then in developing an anxiety symptoms that eventually lead to a disorder. Childhood adversity, such as abuse or trauma, children who have a high level of adversity are more likely to develop anxiety disorders later in life. Now, there's no direct connection between the type of adversity like abuse and the type of anxiety disorder that develops, but it's more of a more diffuse influence on why somebody might develop anxiety. But as you might imagine, if you have issues where you were growing up and every time the clock struck 9 and you were out of bed, your parent whipped you, then it could maybe all of a sudden explain why you had a deathly fear of clocks or clocks that chimed. Okay, you can see where that connection would be made. And then a third social factor that can influence things are the attachment relationships. So there are really, with any attachment, anxiety is an innate response to separation. So, in other words, when those young children, usually about 1.5 year olds, they get separated from a parent, they cry, they get very upset, they are anxious about that connection being severed. And so they want to be close to that individual. Now, most kids do not develop anxiety issues because of having good attachments, but there are a subset of attachments called kind of an anxious attachments where those individuals who had anxious attachments then are much more likely to manifest anxiety later in life too. Okay, so stressful life events, childhood adversity, and attachment relationships are all social factors that can influence the development of an anxiety disorder. Next, let's look at some of the neurobiology or genetic factors that are involved. They think that anxiety disorders are kind of a modest heritability. So, in other words, like if one of your parents had it, you have a modest chance, around 20 to 30%. in regards to like generalized anxiety disorder, that you're going to develop it yourself. Now, regarding the neurobiology, it's important for us to understand how fear works in our brain. And the main thing you understand is the amygdala. And the amygdala is kind of the fear center, and it's charged with remembering when we are under threat and then triggering action to get out of that threat. And you can imagine that's very helpful when we talk about survival. And we have two pathways where we process this information from our amygdala. The first pathway, the fast one, directly connects between the thalamus and the amygdala through the hypothalamus. And so you can have that reaction you see there where the thalamus receives the stimulus of a snake, shunts it to the amygdala registers it and triggers physical action fast. Okay. And then later, the image of the snake comes in. So it's almost like you react prior to even fully recognizing what something is. Because the second pathway, which is complementary, goes from the thalamus to the cortex and provides a lot more detailed and more comparatively slower kind of analysis of the information that's been detected. So it's longer than the first path to go the second path, and therefore it takes longer to generate a response. So, in other words, have you ever had a chance or an opportunity where you got scared with something, a snake maybe, it's a very common fear, and you've already taken two steps back before you fully registered, oh, it's a gardener snake. I probably don't need to do that. But you've already reacted. And that's the illustration of this kind of fast circuitry from the thalamus to amygdala to hypothalamus compared to the slower thalamus to the general cortex, which you see with number 4 here on the illustration. So, social context and the amygdala, things like panic disorder, that fear module, that pathway 1 may be triggered at an inappropriate time. Let's say you just glance and see a snake on a billboard or something, you're always taking a couple steps back, or you develop a panic attack, or things like that. And it's the inappropriate triggering of that contributes to those panic attacks. Okay, so next, module 7, we're going to continue talking more specifically about causes of anxiety disorder. So switch on over to that one right now.